I had heard about Walter Kramer many times over the years. He was a figure of success and wisdom in my husband's life, a man who had taught him nearly everything he knew about the world of finance. When he invited me to join him at the golf course, saying he needed a small favor, I was puzzled, yet a little intrigued. I hadn't expected to feel anything beyond polite admiration for the man who had once been such an important part of my husband's career. But as we strolled across the manicured lawns, our conversation turning from trivialities to deeper, more personal reflections, I felt a strange pull, a magnetic, almost forbidden allure. Walter was in his mid-60s, his silver hair impeccably combed, his posture as confident and composed as it must have been decades ago. He had an air of mystery about him, a charm that was subtle yet undeniable. Each word he spoke was measured, each glance lingering just a bit longer than necessary, filling the space between us with an electricity I hadn't anticipated. "Your husband's a lucky man, you know," he murmured, eyes fixed on the distant horizon as he adjusted his golf club. His voice was warm, low, yet touched with something unreadable. "Oh, and why's that?" I replied, feeling a blush creep into my cheeks. He turned his gaze toward me, his dark eyes shining with something close to amusement. "Because he has a wife who cares about him deeply. You're attentive, understanding, and remarkably patient." His words hung in the air, wrapping around me with an intimacy I hadn't felt in years. Our conversation turned quiet after that, the silence between us thick and comfortable, yet charged. I felt the gentle brush of his hand as he guided me across the grassy knoll, his touch light but lingering. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but my pulse quickened in response. There was a depth to this encounter that went beyond words, a sense of unspoken understanding, of a connection that seemed as natural as it was forbidden. The sun dipped low, casting a warm golden glow across the golf course, and with every step, the world around us seemed to fade. I could feel the heat of his presence beside me, his every move deliberate and composed, like a seasoned player who knew the game far too well. And as we reached the edge of the green, I knew, in a way that defied logic, that we had crossed an invisible line. As we reached the clubhouse, the quiet murmur of voices filled the air, blending with the soft clinking of glasses and the low hum of a jazz tune playing somewhere inside. I expected our conversation to return to something lighthearted, maybe about his recent travels or his business ventures, but Walter had other intentions. He held the door open for me, his hand grazing the small of my back as I stepped through, sending a shiver down my spine. It was such a small gesture, so easily dismissed as courteous, yet it felt loaded with intention. We found a secluded corner, away from the others, and settled into a booth that overlooked the course. Walter ordered a bottle of wine, and as he poured, I watched the deep red liquid swirl into my glass, feeling my heart thrum with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. His eyes never left mine, intense and probing, as if he were studying each reaction, each shift in my expression. "To new beginnings," he said softly, raising his glass. I swallowed, feeling the weight of his gaze. "To new beginnings," I replied, clinking my glass against his. We sipped in silence, and the wine's warmth blossomed in my chest, loosening something inside me. My thoughts tangled, caught between propriety and an inexplicable desire that seemed to thicken with every passing second. His hand rested on the table, fingers slightly curled, and I found myself drawn to the simple elegance of it, the strength, the subtle calyces that spoke of years of experience, and the quiet confidence in the way he held himself. Walter broke the silence, his voice softer than before. "You know, when I first saw you, I wondered what kind of woman could captivate your husband so completely." There was a hint of a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes, which stayed fixed on mine, unwavering. "And now that you've met me?" I asked, unable to mask the hint of curiosity in my tone. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a murmur that seemed meant only for me. "Now, I wonder if he truly understands the treasure he has." The words left me breathless, a spark igniting in my chest that felt both thrilling and dangerous. There was a brief silence, and in that moment, I was acutely aware of every detail, his gaze that seemed to peel back layers, the way his fingers brushed the rim of his glass, the slight tilt of his head that brought him closer, close enough that I could catch the faint scent of his cologne. I think he does," I stammered, feeling the need to ground myself in reality, to remember the vows I had made. But even as I spoke, there was a part of me deep down that questioned the truth of my own words. Walter had awakened something within me, a part of myself I hadn't even realized was dormant. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached across the table, his fingers brushing against mine, a gentle touch that sent a wave of warmth through me. His hand lingered, his skin rough yet soothing, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of my hand in a way that felt as natural as breathing. The world around us seemed to blur, the voices fading into the background until there was only him, only us. "I know this may seem unexpected," he began, his voice barely a whisper, "but there's something undeniable here, isn't there?" His eyes searched mine, and I felt my defenses crumbling piece by piece. "Yes," I admitted, my voice barely audible. It was the only answer I could give, the only truth I could cling to in that moment. We sat there, the silence between us deepening, charged with an intensity that words couldn't convey. My pulse raced, my mind filled with 1,000 conflicting thoughts, each one vying for dominance, yet all ultimately drowned out by the magnetic pull I felt toward him. Every inch of space between us felt like a chasm, and yet it was a chasm I wanted to cross, to bridge, even as I fought against the desire that surged within me. After what felt like an eternity, he released my hand, his fingers slipping away in a slow, reluctant gesture. "Come with me," he said, his voice steady, yet laced with an urgency that echoed my own. There was no hesitation, no second guessing, just a silent understanding, a shared need that neither of us could deny. We rose, walking side by side through the empty corridors of the clubhouse, our footsteps muffled by the plush carpet. The air was thick with anticipation, each step bringing us closer to something that felt inevitable. My heart pounded, my breath shallow as we reached the edge of the course, the sprawling greens bathed in the soft glow of twilight. Walter stopped, turning to face me, his expression softened, vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen before. His gaze held mine, and in that moment I felt the full weight of what was about to happen, of the line we were about to cross. And yet, I felt no fear, no hesitation, only a deep, unyielding desire that refused to be silenced. Without a word, he reached for me, his hand cupping my cheek, his thumb brushing against my skin with a tenderness that melted the last of my resistance. I closed my eyes, letting myself sink into his touch, feeling the world around us dissolve, leaving only the warmth of his hand, the softness of his breath as he leaned closer, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss that was as gentle as it was inevitable. His kiss was soft at first, a tentative exploration that seemed to ask permission even as it ignited something fierce within me. The warmth of his lips was a revelation, each touch sending a thrill through me, awakening a longing I hadn't known existed. I found myself responding, leaning into him, letting my hands rest on his chest as his arms enveloped me, pulling me closer, grounding me in a moment that felt both surreal and profoundly real. There was no rush, no urgency, only a slow, deliberate unfolding of something that felt like it had been waiting in the shadows, biding its time. Every brush of his lips, every gentle touch, felt like a promise, a silent acknowledgement of the connection that had sparked between us. The cool evening air wrapped around us, a sharp contrast to the warmth we shared, heightening every sensation, every beat of my heart that pulsed in sync with his. Walter's hands moved to my shoulders, then trailed down to the small of my back, his touch firm yet tender, each movement imbued with a care that took me by surprise. It was as if he understood the weight of this moment, as if he sensed the walls I'd built around myself, and he was peeling them away with each careful caress. I felt my own hands drift up, fingertips tracing the line of his jaw, feeling the roughness of his stubble beneath my touch, grounding myself in the solidity of him, the undeniable presence that filled every inch of space around us. When we finally broke apart, breathless, he didn't pull away. His forehead rested against mine, our breaths mingling in the narrow space between us, creating a moment that felt both intimate and endless. His gaze searched mine, a question in his eyes that didn't need words, a silent acknowledgement of the road we had just begun to travel down. "You're remarkable," he murmured, his voice thick with something I couldn't quite name. "I knew at the moment I met you, but I didn't expect this." I managed a shaky smile, my own thoughts a tangled mess of contradictions, desires, and the faintest flicker of doubt. "Neither did I whispered, my fingers still resting against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath my palm. We stood there, wrapped in the quiet of the evening, our connection a fragile yet powerful thread that neither of us dared to sever. His fingers brushed a stray strand of hair from my face, his touch lingering, his thumb tracing the line of my cheekbone in a gesture so tender it made my heart ache. I had thought I knew who I was, what I wanted, but Walter had unlocked something within me, a yearning, a restlessness that defied reason. He took a slow breath, his gaze softening as he looked at me, his expression a mix of admiration and uncertainty. "I don't want to complicate things for you," he said quietly, his voice laced with a hint of regret. "But I also can't pretend this isn't real." A part of me wanted to reassure him, to tell him that everything would be fine, that we could return to our lives unchanged, untouched by what had just passed between us. But I knew, even as the thought crossed my mind, that it was impossible. There was no going back, not after this. "I know," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper, my fingers tracing gentle patterns across his collarbone. "I can't pretend either." The weight of our confession settled between us, a fragile acceptance of the undeniable truth we shared. I felt a strange sense of freedom, as if by acknowledging this connection, I had released a part of myself that had been shackled, hidden away for so long. And though the path ahead was uncertain, there was a thrill in that uncertainty, a quiet exhilaration that whispered of possibilities, of a life lived not in fear, but in the boldness of desire. He took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine, his grip warm and steady, a silent reassurance in the midst of the swirling emotions that danced between us. Together we walked back to the clubhouse, the shadows lengthening around us, casting our path in a soft amber glow. The silence felt different now, comforting, yet charged with an intimacy that went beyond words, a shared understanding that neither of us could ignore. As we reached the entrance, he paused, his hand slipping from mine, his gaze lingering on me with an intensity that left me breathless. "This doesn't have to be the end," he said, his voice low, a thread of hope woven through his words. A lump formed in my throat, the weight of the decision pressing down on me, filling my mind with possibilities, with the countless ways this could play out. But in that moment, all I knew was that I didn't want to walk away, not yet. Not from him, not from this. I nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but it was enough. The smile that touched his lips was soft, a glimmer of something vulnerable breaking through his usual composure. And in that moment, I felt a surge of affection for him, not just as the man who had captivated my heart, but as someone who had dared to break through the barriers, to see me for who I was, to awaken something within me that I had long forgotten. "Then let's see where this takes us," he murmured, his fingers brushing against mine in a final, lingering touch before he stepped back, a silent promise in his gaze. I watched him disappear into the shadows, my heart pounding with a mixture of exhilaration and trepidation. This wasn't the end, it was only the beginning, a tentative first step into an unknown future, one that I knew would be filled with complexities, with challenges, but also with the promise of something real, something that went beyond the boundaries I had once clung to. As I walked back to my car, the cool night air filling my lungs, I felt a quiet thrill course through me, a sense of anticipation that left me breathless. The memory of his touch lingered, his words echoing in my mind, each one a reminder of the journey we had just begun. And though the road ahead was uncertain, filled with risks and unknowns, there was a part of me that felt alive, daring, and ready to embrace whatever came next. Over the next few days, I felt the weight of our encounter pressing on me like an invisible hand, a constant reminder of the line we had crossed and the emotions now simmering beneath the surface. I replayed every word, every glance, every touch in my mind, dissecting each moment as if trying to understand what had changed within me. And yet, I couldn't deny the sense of exhilaration that lingered, a thrill that defied my attempts at reason. I told myself it was just a fleeting infatuation, a fascination born from the allure of the forbidden. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. Walter had awakened something in me, something raw, something real. It was as if he had reached into the depths of my heart, pulling me into a world of emotions I had kept hidden, buried beneath layers of responsibility and routine. I busied myself with mundane tasks, trying to ignore the pull that seemed to draw me toward him, even when he wasn't there. I felt his presence everywhere, in the soft breeze that drifted through the open windows, in the quiet moments when I found myself lost in thought. My husband noticed my distraction, but he didn't pry. To him, I was simply preoccupied with some imagined concern, a fleeting mood that would pass in time. But it didn't pass. It lingered, growing stronger with each passing day, an invisible thread that tied me to Walter, a connection that I couldn't sever no matter how hard I tried. One afternoon, my phone buzzed, jolting me from my reverie. It was a message from Walter. His words were simple, but they held a depth that left me breathless. Meet me. Same place. 5 p.m. My heart raced as I stared at the screen, my mind filled with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. I knew what this meeting would mean, the unspoken understanding that lay behind his invitation, and yet I couldn't resist. I didn't want to resist. As the clock ticked closer to 5, I felt a nervous energy build within me, a sense of anticipation that made my pulse quicken. I chose my outfit carefully, something simple yet elegant, a soft blouse and a skirt that flowed just above my knees, something that felt both comfortable and alluring. It was as if I were dressing for a secret rendezvous, a moment that felt as thrilling as it did forbidden. When I arrived at the golf course, the sky was tinged with the warm hues of dusk, casting a golden glow over the landscape. Walter was waiting by the clubhouse, his gaze focused on the horizon, his posture as composed and assured as ever. But when he turned to me, there was a softness in his eyes, a vulnerability that sent a shiver down my spine. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice low, his gaze holding mine with an intensity that made my breath hitch. I couldn't stay away, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. It was the truth, stripped of any pretense or denial. I had tried to distance myself, to keep him at arm's length, but I had failed. The pull between us was too strong, too undeniable. He reached for my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine, his touch warm and steady. We stood there in silence, the weight of our unspoken feelings filling the space between us, and in that moment I realized that this wasn't just a fleeting attraction. It was something deeper, something that had taken root within me, changing the way I saw the world, the way I saw myself. Walter led me down a narrow path, away from the main course, to a secluded grove hidden from view by a cluster of trees. The air was still, filled with the scent of pine and earth, a quiet sanctuary that felt removed from the rest of the world. He released my hand, his gaze searching mine, as if seeking confirmation, a silent permission to cross the final line that separated us. I took a breath, steadying myself, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me, a choice that would change everything, that would bind us together in a way that went beyond words. But as I looked into his eyes, I felt a certainty, a clarity that erased any lingering doubts. Without a word, he stepped closer, his hands resting on my waist, his touch firm yet gentle. I closed my eyes, feeling his warmth, the quiet strength that radiated from him, grounding me in a moment that felt timeless. When his lips met mine, there was no hesitation, no restraint. The kiss was slow, deliberate, each movement filled with a tenderness that took my breath away. His hands moved along my back, tracing gentle patterns that sent shivers down my spine, his touch igniting a fire that spread through me, filling me with a longing that I had never known. I let myself sink into him, my hands finding their way to his shoulders, feeling the solidity of him, the strength that seemed to hold me together, even as I felt myself unravel. We moved together in a quiet rhythm, each touch, each kiss deepening the connection between us, a bond that felt as natural as it was inevitable. The world around us faded, leaving only the two of us, lost in a moment that felt both forbidden and profoundly right. There was no need for words, no need for explanations. We understood each other, our connection a language all its own, spoken in whispers and soft caresses, in the quiet certainty of shared desire. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the grove in shadow, we finally pulled apart, breathless, our gazes locked in a silent promise. He cupped my face in his hands, his eyes filled with a depth of emotion that left me speechless. "Whatever happens, us, it's real," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Don't ever doubt that." I nodded, my own voice caught in my throat, my heart filled with a warmth that defied words. I knew, in that moment, that this wasn't the end of our story. It was only the beginning, a journey that would be as complex as it was beautiful, filled with challenges and choices, but also with a love that had taken root within us, binding us together in ways that defied reason. As we walked back to the clubhouse, his hand resting on the small of my back, I felt a quiet peace settle over me, a sense of acceptance that had eluded me for so long. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with unknowns, but for the first time I was ready to face it not alone, but with him by my side, a partner in a journey that we had chosen together. In that moment, I knew that whatever lay ahead, I would carry this memory with me, a reminder of the night that had changed everything, a night that had revealed the depths of my heart and the courage to embrace a love that was as undeniable as it was forbidden.